Hello, my name is Sophia and I am 32 years old. Although I am a grown woman who has become a wife, mother, and mistress of my own home, every time I think about my childhood, the same image comes to mind: me standing at the kitchen door, my modest lunchbox in my hands, and a lump of silence in my mouth, so thick that it could have been used for breakfast instead of porridge. To those around me, I was always that reliable girl, obedient and calm, a girl without problems, without hysterics, without complaints, a shadow dissolving in the radiance of a spotlight directed exclusively at my younger sister, Amber. Amber had asthma. This word sounded in our house like a sentence, like a prayer, like an explanation for everything. Her illness was not just a health condition, it became a way of life for the whole family. Every morning, while I silently cut an apple or spread peanut butter on bread, Mom, Brenda, loomed over Amber, as if trying to protect her not only from the outside world, but from life itself. She seemed fragile as porcelain, leaning toward her daughter, with concern in her voice. Amber, honey, how are you breathing today? Where's your inhaler? And I stood there, trying not to make noise, not to disturb, not to take up space. I waited for someone to turn to me, to ask if I'd eaten, if everything was okay, but no one did. Dad, Frank, was no exception. When he wasn't stuck at work all day long, trying to handle Amber's bottomless medical bills, he sat next to her, stroking her hair, softly whispering, "You're a fighter, my little one." He called her his warrior, his hope, and me he didn't call me anything. I couldn't remember the last time he looked at me like he saw someone important in front of him. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy! I realized pretty early, if I need something, comfort, help, just a look, I have to achieve it myself, without shouting, without asking, just take and do it. I did. I took on studying, homework, extracurricular projects. While my parents were vigilant at night by Amber's bed, I sat in my room and crammed formulas, wrote essays, built my invisible tower of achievements, which, alas, no one noticed. In high school, I was already surpassing my peers in every subject, and all this was not for praise, not for awards, it was survival. I applied to colleges secretly, as if there was something forbidden in it. I searched for scholarships myself, read the rules, collected papers, rewrote the essays 10 times, and then one day I found an envelope in the mailbox, the one I had been waiting for, with the university logo, an offer for a full trip. I clutched it in my hands, sitting on the steps of our porch, holding it for exactly 10 minutes, hoping that maybe this moment right here, right now, would bring me the recognition I had been waiting for, that if I walked into the house, showing it, they would suddenly see me. I burst into the kitchen, shaking all over, holding the letter, like a ticket to another life, in my hands. Mom was standing at the stove, as always, casserole, gluten-free, dairy-free, allergen-free for Amber. She didn't even turn around, just threw over her shoulder, "That's nice, dear, please set the table, Amber needs to eat soon." And that was it. Not a look, not a smile, not a question. I set the table. I said nothing. But deep inside, in the part of me that no one seemed to notice, I made a vow: if they couldn't see me now, they would, someday. College was the beginning of a new world, a new page where I finally had the right to exist. I dove into my studies like a person surfacing after being underwater for so long. I graduated with honors, and I didn't tell anyone. No call, no letter, no invitation to the ceremony. Why? For whom? This triumph was mine alone, or maybe it only made sense then. After graduation, I got a job at Reynolds & Company, a financial firm in the city center. I moved into a modest but cozy apartment on the other side of town. For the first time in my life, I felt silence, not oppressive, but liberating, and freedom, like the air after a thunderstorm. And that's when Jack showed up. The marketing manager, the guy next door, the man with the kindest smile and an incredible clumsiness, especially when it came to coffee cup lids. He once spilled a full latte all over his laptop keyboard, and as I scrambled to get napkins, he muttered, grinning sheepishly, "I guess I just needed an excuse to talk to you." It was our first conversation, and, as it turned out, the beginning of a new story. A year passed, and we were married. No wedding dresses, no invitations, no drama, just two people in a courthouse saying "I do." For the first time in our lives, that was enough. And then Bella came along, our girl, with her daddy's smile, her stubborn chin, and that amazing light that filled the house to the brim, and in that moment, I knew I would never return to the shadows I once lived in. For 8 years, 8 quiet, precious years, we built our lives. Bella grew up surrounded by fairy tales, the smell of pancakes on weekends, and forehead kisses from a father who never let a day go by without a kind word. One early morning, when the sun was just beginning to break through the kitchen blinds and the house was still soft and sleepy, Jack, with his usual kindness and that special attention with which he so easily filled even the most mundane moments, leaned across the kitchen table, kissed Bella on the top of her head, me on the cheek, and, leaning back with a smile, said, "4 days in Milwaukee, promotion, conference, be back before Friday pizza, I promise." He winked, grabbed his rolling suitcase, and disappeared out the door, leaving behind the smell of fresh aftershave and the comfortable certainty that all was well. But Jack never came home. No unexpected tragedy to strike that day, no warnings, no alarm bells, just the dry, sharp news on the newsfeed: a passenger train had derailed, no survivors, and just like that, in one brief moment, my life was split in two, like glass under a heavy heel, with a crunch, and no way to glue it back together. The days after his death were like a drawn-in veil, everything happening around me, but nothing directly touching me. I remember the funeral, but I don't remember who spoke, who held my hand. I remember neighbors and friends bringing casseroles, cookies, and prepared meals, but I never touched those plates. It seemed almost a betrayal to eat while Jack lay in the ground. I remember Bella's face, her huge eyes full of fear and incomprehension, standing at the front door, hoping that at any moment she would hear a familiar footstep, the sound of keys, a voice saying, "I'm home, girls." She was only 8 years old, as long enough to know that something terrible has happened, and yet not long enough to realize that this broken heart will never fully heal. At night, I would lie next to her, holding her close, feeling her thin shoulders tremble, and whisper, trying to instill some reassurance, "Everything will be okay, honey. Mom is here." And at that time, I would helplessly stare at the ceiling and think about how we would even manage to buy groceries next week, how we would pay the rent, how I would take her to school when I could barely get out of bed. Jack, fortunately, had life insurance, something he had taken care of in advance. Like everything else in our lives, there was money, but that wasn't the problem. I needed help, not financial help, real, living help, human help. Someone who would take Bella from school when I couldn't stop crying, someone who would sit with her and give me at least an hour to come to my senses, someone who would just be there. And for the first time in years, I dialed Mom's number, my breath caught in my throat, my voice shaking before I could even say her name. "Mom. I can't cope. Could you watch Bella for a while?" While I sort out this, there was a pause on the other end, so long I could almost hear the clock ticking in her kitchen, and then she said, in the same tone she always used when the subject wasn't Amber's, "Oh, honey. You know I'm not that young anymore. The blood pressure, the medication. I just can't do it. These kids, they're so energetic now, it takes so much." And now the woman who once took Amber to 3 doctors a week sat up all night next to her bed, boiled broth, and ran to pharmacies. She couldn't devote a few days to her own granddaughter. I swallowed, feeling something inside me break again, like so many years ago, and answered, "It's okay, I'll think of something." And I did. I found Sandra, a woman in her 50s, with a soft voice, warm, grandmotherly eyes, and the incredible patience that only mothers who have lived through their children's adolescence have. Sandra immediately understood what Bella was missing: gentleness, stability, care. She played with her as if Bella were her own granddaughter, and with her help, I was able to go back to work, start cooking dinner again, paying bills, scheduling my days as if I were rebuilding a broken house brick by brick. I didn't tell my parents how much their rejection hurt me. I just let them go. I stopped expecting them to come over. Sometimes they called, not to check in on me, no, to tell me how Amber was doing, a new doctor, a new diet, an experimental treatment. The conversation was always about her. I nodded, agreed, tuned out. Only once, when I mentioned Bella was having a piano recital, did my mother, without thinking, throw out, "Oh, that's so great." That same stock answer, like the curtain you pull out of habit, without looking out the window, absent-minded, detached. And then something happened that turned everything upside down. Amber got engaged. His name was Connor. My mother was thrilled, calling almost every day, like a girl, You won't believe it, he has a family, they own a huge real estate company. We were all just, ah. Her voice literally shone through the phone. I forced a smile through gritted teeth and replied, "That's wonderful, give her our congratulations." But just a few days after my mother's call, excited to share the news of Amber's engagement, I received another call, a very different call, from my father. There was no joy or pride in his voice, no casual chuckle that I had grown accustomed to as a child. No, there was panic, anxious and heavy. Like thick fog on a November morning. "Yulia," he began, using a name he hadn't spoken in years. "We were thinking, taking out a mortgage on the house. The wedding is going to be, well, honey." I froze, barely managing to sit down over a cup of coffee, my heart skipping a beat. "Dad, this is your retirement home, you can't be serious." There was a long, strained exhalation on the other end of the line, and then his voice became sharp, like it had been when he had scolded me for scratching the walls in the hallway. "We can't let Connor's family think we're broke. We have to give Amber a wedding she deserves." After a moment, he added, "The papers are already signed, 60 grand, the loan is in place." Everything that happened after that flashed in my head in one silent frame. Jack and I standing in a modest courtroom, me in a $35 dress, holding a paper bouquet, the air filled with the scent of cheap perfume and vanilla cake, from which we each got a slice, as was our due. A kiss, laughter, freedom, happiness, all that really mattered was in us, not in the scenery. And now, 60 grand, I tried to gently offer help. "Maybe I can chip in a little? Just so I don't have to take on so much money." But Mom instantly flared up like a dry match. "You don't understand, Sophia, this is Amber's day, she deserves something special. We can't look cheap in front of his family." I bit my tongue, feeling the salty taste of blood spread across the roof of my mouth. They didn't care. They didn't care that Jack was gone, that Bella and I were barely hanging on, that I'd asked for help and received only indifference. Amber's wedding took place 3 months later, and it really was just like they'd dreamed. Sparkling chandeliers in a rented hall, crystal vases on the tables, a live orchestra, and a cake that cost as much as a month's rent on my apartment. Mom and Dad were smiling as if they'd won the jackpot, full of pride and some kind of manic satisfaction. And then, like after a play, when the spotlights go out and the actors disappear into their dressing rooms, Amber and Connor left for Philadelphia, and she stopped answering. First the occasional text, then nothing. Weeks passed, then months. The calls went unanswered, and with them, the laughter in my parents' voices, their energy, their confidence, the house filled with a tension you could cut with a knife. One night, late at night, when Bella was asleep and I was sitting at the computer, sorting through work reports, the phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was so quiet I could barely make it out. "Sophia, she's not answering. We took out a loan for her wedding, and now she won't even help with the payments." I closed my eyes, feeling a slow storm brewing inside me, anger, bitterness, and that "I told you so." But all I said out loud was, "This must be hard, Mom." I wish it sounded sincere. But even I didn't believe it myself. The next call was from both of them. Their voices were flat, distant. "Sophia," my father began, "we're losing our house." My mother added, sniffling, "We're behind on our payments. We were wondering if you could move in with us? Help with the mortgage, with the bills, just for a little while." I stared at the walls of my apartment, my sanctuary, the quiet space I'd built with my own hands, and thought about all the victims no one knew about. But then I looked at Bella, now 11. She was sitting in her bunny pajamas, leafing through a picture book, daydreaming. She'd grown up so quickly since Jack died, she'd been through so much. Maybe it would actually be good for her to be closer to her grandparents, to feel some kind of family. And so, despite every instinct screaming no in me, I said, "Okay, we'll move." I found a reliable couple, responsible tenants, with steady jobs, no debt, good references. We signed a lease for a year. Then Bella and I started packing our lives into boxes, memories, toys, dishes, books. When we arrived at my parents' house, it seemed old and diminished to me, as if all these years had shrunk the walls, faded the wallpaper, cracked the tiles in the kitchen. But Bella liked it. She ran down the hallway as if it were a castle and not a house full of unhealed wounds. Her laughter echoed off the walls like a bell. I told myself, I can do this. I started paying $1,500 a month for the mortgage, plus another $500 for food, utilities, incidentals, $2,000 a month. Over time, This amount turned into $72,000, my own money. They never offered to give even part of it back, but at first, everything was bearable. My father even began to look better, healthier. Mom started picking Bella up from school, meeting her at the school gates with a thermos of cocoa, helping her with her homework, sitting patiently at the dining room table, correcting her mistakes in dictation, encouraging her with soft words I had never heard her say to me before. She even started baking cookies, with cinnamon, vanilla, sometimes nuts if she was sure Bella was cool with them, and the house would fill with an aroma that made my throat tighten with a nostalgia I thought I'd never had. The same woman who once calmly declared that she was too tired, too sick, too overwhelmed to look after her own granddaughter now seemed like the embodiment of a grandmother from a fairy tale. A knitted cardigan, a soft voice, endless patience. Bella would glow as soon as Mom took an apple pie out of the oven. She looked at it with big eyes and said, "Mom, this is the best pie in the world. You have to learn to make it like this." I smiled and nodded, hiding something complicated, contradictory, almost painful inside me. And for a while, I almost believed, or wanted to believe, that maybe everything really was changing, that maybe right now, after so many years, my parents and I were really becoming a family. I suppressed those old memories that hid the cold looks, the missed school performances, the quiet birthdays when no one came. I told myself, everything is different now. I am seen, finally. Maybe all my invisibility was to get to this moment, the moment when the house became warm, when Bella laughed and Mom baked cookies. But deep down I knew, like a person who has once been burned knows, that all this is too fragile, like thin ice in the spring. And I was right, because 3 years after Bella and I moved into this house, 3 years of bills and compromises and fake smiles and bitten tongues, the door swung open and there was someone I never thought I'd see again, Amber, with a round belly, shining eyes, and the same smile she used to walk into a room with. Knowing all the attention was now hers, her hands were on her belly, like she was holding a jewel. My mother rushed past me like I was just a coat rack at the entrance. "Amber. Honey, you can't stand in the draft, come in, hurry. Come in." I stood there, holding Bella's backpack in one hand and a shopping bag in the other, watching the scene like a bad dream that had somehow become real again. All the warmth that had slowly and painstakingly built up in this house evaporated, as if it had never been there. It was replaced by that suffocating, sticky tension that once made me leave the room early and lock myself in the bathroom. The cushions on the sofa, the ones I'd bought myself, were suddenly plumped up in a new way, just the way Amber liked them. Dinner was back with her favorites: creamed potatoes, roasted carrots with honey, goat cheese salad. Mom was making chamomile tea again and taking my temperature twice a day, saying, "You have to watch it, in case it fluctuates." Over dinner, Amber, slowly stirring her orange juice with a spoon, said with lazy confidence, "I think I'll have the baby here, that way Mom and Dad can help. It just feels right." I nearly choked on my water. Mom's face flushed as if it were Christmas morning. "Of course, honey, we'll take care of everything, anything that needs to be done." The same people who had once told me they were too old, too sick, too tired to care for Bella were now ready to stand on tiptoe to serve pregnant Amber. The same people who couldn't stop by even once a week when I cried at night over the loss of my husband. I didn't say a word, I just sat there and ate, like a guest at someone else's party, the pieces of dinner that felt like stones in my throat. Later that evening, my parents asked me to step out into the hallway for a minute. I knew what was coming, I could feel it in the air, in the way my father adjusted his glasses, the way my mother crossed her arms over her chest. "Sophia," my father began, "Amber especially needs stability right now, you understand. We were thinking, maybe it was time to transfer your apartment into her name, for the sake of the baby." My mother continued, as if she had rehearsed it in advance. There was silence. It was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the old thermostat clicking. "No," I said, without hesitation, "this apartment is Bella's safety, it's all we have, I'm not giving her up." My dad's face hardened, my mom's lips tightened, the way they always did when she heard something she didn't understand. "We just thought you'd understand," she said coldly. "It's not about understanding," I said, "it's about boundaries." No one else said anything that night, but the air in the house was different. It felt thicker, heavier, like it was filled with something sticky, viscous. I could feel it pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe again. Over the next week, strange, almost imperceptible changes began to occur. changes that to an outsider might seem random, insignificant, even mundane, but to me they were like subtle, barely perceptible cracks in glass, harbingers of a quick, inevitable rift. Bella's usual snacks, the cheerful packages of applesauce, her favorite cheese crackers, even the yogurts that my mother used to buy especially for her, were suddenly gone from the pantry. The cookies that had recently appeared in the kitchen in the warmth of freshly baked goods no longer smelled like them in the evenings. My mother's smile, the one that had inspired a fragile hope in my heart, faded, gone, dissolved into the daily chores that now revolved exclusively around Amber: foot massages, lovingly warmed pillows, repapering the room that was now called the nursery. Mom spent her days in there, folding tiny onesies, straightening diapers, as if those movements could erase everything that had once been between us. Then one evening, returning from the supermarket with 2 heavy bags in my hands and the fatigue of a single working mother, I saw something that at first simply took my breath away, and then pierced me with a chill to the very heart. Bella was sitting on the porch, in her socks, her knees pressed to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks, and nearby, on the asphalt, our bags, boxes, clothes, books, everything that made up our lives, were strewn in disarray. She rushed toward me, clutching my jacket with her hands, sobbing as I had not heard her cry since Jack died. Mom and Amber yelled at me. She said we have to leave. Grandpa was angry when I cried. He pushed me, pulled my hair, and hit me. I felt my heart shrink to a tiny, shaking point. My skin went cold, my fingers went numb, but my body was already moving on its own. I threw my bags aside, flew into the house like a storm, like a mother protecting her child, like a woman who can no longer remain silent. Amber sat on the couch, quiet as a queen, one hand on her stomach, the other holding a mug of chamomile tea, a thin smile on her face. Mum looked up from the changing table where she was carefully folding tiny socks. Dad stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, and said nothing, offered no apology or justification. How dare you? I whispered, and then the scream came of its own accord. How dare you touch my baby? Amber pretended to be bored. She was screaming, hysterical. You know how she is, Dad barked. She needs discipline. She's 11. I screamed, stepping between them and the door where Bella was shaking. And you hit her. Bella stood pressed against me, her hair disheveled, her cheek as red as a fresh scar. Do you think I paid your mortgage for 3 years, raised my daughter alone, sacrificed myself so that you, Frank, could throw her away like trash? My father took a step forward, but then stopped. His face went white, and he hissed, "Get out, and don't come back. You're not our daughter." My mother didn't react, didn't even flinch. She continued folding the diapers as if nothing had happened. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. "You're right," I said, "I'm not." Then I turned to Bella, took her hand, and said, "Come on." And for the second time in my life, I walked out of the house that had never really been mine, but this time I was holding my daughter's hand, and there was a fire in my heart. We spent that night in a cheap roadside motel, among hastily packed suitcases and a courage I didn't know I had. Bella fell asleep in my arms, sobbing, still shaking, clutching her stuffed owl. I didn't sleep a wink. I sat up all night, staring at the faded wallpaper, running through my options. In the morning, in the gray light of dawn, I opened my laptop, trying to think clearly. My apartment was a rental, and I couldn't legally just evict the tenants, but I needed a place for Bella and me, safe, forever. By midday, I'd found a furnished apartment that could be rented month to month, tiny but bright, about 20 minutes from my office. It wasn't perfect, but it was clean, quiet, and, most importantly, ours. I called my tenants and, with a heavy sigh, gave them the required 4 months' notice. They were understanding. Bella and I moved in. Those weeks were strange, up in the air. We weren't homeless, but we didn't feel at home either. Bella barely spoke, her drawings were dark, the color gone. She didn't laugh anymore. I wasn't either. I was angry, at them, at myself, at having let anyone believe again. And exactly 4 months later, we were back, in my apartment, my fortress, my choice. I inserted the key into the lock, and the door opened with a soft click. Bella ran in first, spinning around the room, laughing for the first time in months. "Mom, we're home," she cried, her voice echoing off the walls soaked with our history, and for the first time, I smiled. We quickly settled into a new routine, those simple but precious rituals that made the house feel safe and quiet again. Bella went back to her old school, And when I walked her there on the first day, her teacher hugged her so tightly I could hardly hold back the tears. Her friends surrounded her as if they had been waiting for her to come back. And I knew she was home. I went back to work, too, not without effort, but with a focus I hadn't felt since before Jack, as if, having weathered another storm, I had regained my footing. Bella and I baked pancakes together on Sundays, slowly building our world anew, layer by layer, like batter that pours into a frying pan, sizzling, browning, and smelling of morning comfort. That Sunday, as I stood at the stove, just flipping another pancake, there was a knock on the door, not a bell, but a knock, confident but not loud. I froze, my whole body tensed. Glancing over my shoulder, I slowly walked to the door and peered through the peephole. My heart sank. There they stood, Mom, Dad, and he had a baby in his arms. I carefully opened the door, leaving the chain in place. Bella peered out from behind me, but I gently touched her shoulder. Go to your room, honey, I said quietly, and she obediently disappeared into the depths of the apartment. I stepped out onto the threshold. My parents looked as if old age had suddenly overtaken them. Their eyes were sunken, their shoulders slumped, their clothes carelessly dressed, without the proud neatness they usually tried to maintain. The spark that had once burned in their eyes at the mere mention of Amber was gone. Mom began first, her voice shaking. We need your help, and tears were already in her eyes. Dad added, pressing his lips together, Amber, she's gone, she left a child to us, and we can't, we're old, tired. We need you. I looked at them, speechless. The baby in Dad's arms was cooing softly, such a small, innocent creature, not guilty of anything. But even that tiny face couldn't erase the pain they had caused. No, I said evenly, without a shadow of a doubt. Mom sniffled, tears freezing on her cheeks. Sophia, please, she began, but I repeated, no, you hurt my daughter, you betrayed me. And now that the child you idolized has turned her back on you, you come to me? My father's voice was as sharp as ever, you're heartless. No, I snapped, I'm finally being honest. My mother's voice was shaking. Are you really going to let your parents lose their home? End up on the street? I looked at them, and something hot and scorching rose in my chest. You mean the house I saved for 3 years while you ignored me? The house you wanted to take from Bella to give to Amber? I noticed the neighbors peeking out from behind the curtains, but I didn't care. I looked straight into my father's eyes. Go away, forget my name, forget my number, forget I ever existed. I reached to close the door, but before my mother could hiss, you are exactly what your father always said you were, ungrateful, cold, vicious. I took a deep breath. You are exactly what I always feared you would be, I said quietly. Manipulative, selfish, and you are no longer my responsibility. I closed the door and turned the key in the lock. A moment later, Bella came out into the hallway, her eyes wide. Are you okay, Mom? She asked. I knelt down next to her, hugged her tightly, and whispered, I am more than okay, I am free. But the story did not end there. That same week, after months of silence, I did what I had long avoided. I filed a police report. I could no longer remain silent. I had no right. I called the detective, told him everything that had happened that night, handed over copies of Bella's medical reports, photos of her injured cheek, a note from our family doctor. A few days later, the wheels of justice finally moved. Frank was arrested for child abuse. Brenda, though not charged with outright assault, was found guilty of aiding and abusing custody. Amber, predictably, was a no-show. She was represented by a lawyer who spoke smoothly and confidently, but without sparkle, without warmth. I wasn't surprised. I had long since ceased to be their priority. The courtroom was cold, not in temperature, but in feel. The walls were light, the furniture neutral, but there was a tension in the air that made your chest ache. Mom sat at the defendant's table, tense, wearing her best floral blouse, her hands folded in her lap as if trying to keep them from shaking. Dad looked older, his shoulders slumped, his eyes clouded over, his voice no longer booming, but a hoarse, barely audible whisper, and only then did I understand. I really wasn't their favorite child, I was just a spare, and they had lost me forever. I sat quietly, motionless, as if any movement could upset the delicate balance of this moment, and Bella sat next to me, her slender fingers tightly intertwined with mine, and I felt them trembling, as if she and I were the last two threads holding each other together, holding in our hands the invisible fabric of our new, albeit exhausted, but still whole life. We waited. The judge leafed through the documents intently, his face expressing neither anger nor sympathy, only a businesslike concentration that made my head spin. He was looking at the photographs, shots of Bella's flushed cheek, taken that very night she had cried in my arms in the cheap motel, a medical report with the dry but terrifying words. Presence of bruises consistent with physical impact, a letter from Sandra, our nanny, notarized, in neat handwriting, describing how Bella's behavior had become anxious, how she laughed less and less, how she flinched at loud voices. Then the videotape began playing in the courtroom, the cameras I had once, not out of paranoia but out of foreboding, set up outside the room where Bella and I slept in my parents' house. It captured the last fragment of the scene, but it was enough. Bella standing by the stairs, crying, Frank pushing her in a rage, pulling her hair. In the background, my mother, standing motionless, paralyzed, watching what was happening but not making a sound. A deathly silence hung in the courtroom. Not a single person moved, coughed, or dared to look in my direction. The judge stopped the tape, looked up, and after a short pause, began to speak. Frank Wilson, he said, his voice calm but heavy with every word, you are hereby sentenced to 3 years in prison for child abuse. There is no parole. I didn't flinch, Bella did. I squeezed her hand tighter, as if giving her my strength. Brenda Wilson, he continued, you are found guilty of aiding and abetting by failing to act during the abuse. You are sentenced to 1 year of supervised probation, a fine of $3,000, and required to attend parenting classes and individual counseling. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother's lips part slightly, as if she wanted to say something, to justify herself, to explain, to protest, but she didn't dare. Then the judge turned to Amber's attorney. Amber Wilson, although not present in person, knowingly abandoned her child to the care of persons against whom there is evidence of child abuse, and, despite being present in the home during the deterioration of her niece's condition, was negligent. She is being sentenced to 1 year of probation, a fine of $5,000, 12 weeks of mandatory parenting classes, and a restraining order that she stay within 200 feet of Sophia Wilson and Bella Wilson for 2 years. I took a deep breath, not because I wanted to, but because I suddenly realized that I had finally exhaled everything I had been holding in. There had been no scenes, no screams, no kneeling, no I'm sorry. There was only silence and clarity. The judge looked up and looked straight at me, his voice softened slightly. Miss Sophia Wilson, this court recognizes your role not only as a mother, but as an advocate. You stood up for your child. Thank you. I nodded, fighting back the tears that suddenly welled up, not from pain, but from something almost unfamiliar, recognition. For the first time in my life, an adult, someone in a position of power, had said it out loud. I was thanked, not out of politeness, not out of necessity, but for real. I heard it, and it meant everything. As Bella and I walked out of the courtroom, reporters stood behind the barricade, holding clipboards, holding microphones, whispering. I didn't answer a single question. I didn't need to. We just walked past, holding Bella's hand as tightly as I had that night we left that house. Later that evening, we sat on our couch, in our apartment, where the walls held no other people's pain, only our love and peace. Bella was silent, looking at her knees, then she suddenly looked up. Mom, are they really going to jail Grandpa? She asked, looking me straight in the eye. Yes, I answered, just as quietly, because what he did was wrong, and when people hurt others, they have to pay for it. She sat in silence for a moment, then asked, what about Grandma? I stroked her hair gently. She will never hurt you again, I promised you. Bella snuggled into me, as she had done as a child, before everything, and whispered, I feel safe now. And in that very moment, amid the dim light of the table lamp and the sounds of the rain outside the window, I suddenly realized, all the years of invisibility, all the silent sacrifices, all the pain, all the loss, all of it was not in vain. All of it brought me here, to peace, to truth, to freedom. In the weeks following the trial, a strange, almost unfamiliar calm settled over our lives, as if the very air in the apartment had become cleaner, softer, lighter. There were no longer anxious shadows in the corners, no more knocking on the door at unpredictable hours, no more tiptoeing around those who wore love like a suit, putting it on for the occasion and taking it off when it became uncomfortable. Gone were the tears before bed, gone were Bella's nightly twitches, gone were those frozen cold hours in which the pain hid. Bella returned to school, and according to her teachers, there was a new spark, a lively gleam in her eyes, an interest in the lessons, a desire to participate, and her drawings were bright again, joyful. She drew trees, houses with windows from which light poured, oceans full of movement, not silent anxiety, not a single red cross, not a single torn figure. Sandra, our nanny, was happy to come back. I just couldn't trust Bella with anyone else when they met. In the school hall, Bella rushed to her the way children rush to their grandmother, whom they really want to see. In that moment, I realized that everything that I lacked as a child, I was able to give my daughter: love, stability, and security. One evening, when the sun was already sinking behind the curtains and the warm light glided softly across the wooden floor of the living room, I sat with a cup of tea in my hands and watched the dust shimmer in the rays of the setting sun, and suddenly, I realized, I was not surviving anymore. I was living, not just existing, not enduring, I was building. For the first time in my life, I was actually building my own life, brick by brick, word by word. That's when the thought came to me. All these years I kept a diary. I wrote when I couldn't speak, line by line, about fear, about anger, about disappointment, about loneliness. The pages were filled with pain, but also sparks of hope, and I thought, what if I'm not alone? What if someone who doesn't even have the words to describe their pain can use mine? And so the blog was born. At first, it was simple, just stories, just the voice of a woman who one day could no longer remain silent. I wrote about single mothers, about women who were made to feel superfluous, weaker, less important. I called it Strong and Smart, a space for those who refused to be small. Within a month, the blog went viral. People wrote, "I thought I was the only one, your story helped me leave. I showed your post to my daughter, thank you." Sponsorships began. Offers to speak at women's centers, schools, support groups. I was no longer just a woman who had survived hell. I became a voice, a platform, an advocate for those who had yet to emerge from the darkness. 6 months later, I received a letter from the National Foundation for Parenting. They had invited me to the Resilience Awards ceremony. I took Bella with me. She was wearing a baby blue dress with a bow, her hair done up neatly, her eyes shining with pride. As we walked onto the stage, I held her hand, and in that second, I was no longer afraid. "This isn't just for me," I said into the microphone, my voice shaking but not from uncertainty. "This is for every mother who's ever been told to be quiet, for every daughter who's ever cried behind closed doors, for everyone who believed they deserved better, and fought for it." People in the audience rose to their feet. The applause washed over us like a wave, but all I could hear was her, Bella, looking at me and whispering, "You're the bravest mom ever." That night, back home, we lay next to each other on her bed, the room filled with a silence that was no longer filled with fear. "Mom," she whispered, "do you ever think about them?" I was silent for a moment. She didn't say anything, but I knew who she was talking about. My parents, Amber, the baby whose face I could barely remember. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "but when I think about them, I'm not angry anymore. I'm proud because we chose something better." Bella smiled, rolled over, and fell asleep within minutes, breathing evenly and calmly, and I sat there for a long time, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, looking at her and feeling the warmth blooming slowly, carefully in my chest. Not many people can rewrite their own history, but I could, and I made sure that the next chapter would be one that I would be proud to pass on, to my daughter, and maybe one day to her daughter. And if this story touched your heart, don't let it remain just another story among others like this. To show your support for every woman who chooses strength over silence, comment below and tell us what part of Sophia's journey touched you the most, because your voice matters. Subscribe so you don't miss out on other powerful, real stories, because here, in this space, every story matters, and every click turns that knowledge into action.